In the 1976 short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, author Ursula K. Le Guin asks us to imagine a utopia, a heaven on earth. If it's prosperity and peace that you value and enjoy, well, then put it here in this heaven. If it's about pleasure and entertainment, well, then imagine that too. If it's technological advancement and innovation, put that in the perfect society. Whatever it is that makes a society perfect, Omelas has it. But at the center of the city is a dark secret. In a rite of passage that all must undergo, the youth of Omelas are taken to the center of the city to see the dread alchemy that makes all of this joy, all of this peace, all of this prosperity possible. They're taken to what is basically a sewer, and there they find an imprisoned child, numbed by years of imprisonment, torture, destitution, deprivation. And they're told that the society, all of its success, all of its peace, all of its, what makes it a utopia, is born of this child's suffering. What do you do with that knowledge? Le Guin gives us two alternatives. Some go through the trial and learn to accept it. One day the switch goes off, and they're able to make the sacrifice worth it by staying and enjoying the fruits of that suffering. Le Guin says that perhaps their pleasure is somehow sweeter knowing what was required. But some simply cannot abide this, that their pleasure, their peace, their joy would be purchased at the expense of another, and they simply one day stand in Omelas' streets, turn away from the city's center, and walk away. Le Guin concludes her story by saying, they seem to know where they're going, these people who walk away from Omelas. But we Episcopalians who don't care for absolute either-ors might imagine perhaps a third option which transformed my own theology when I came to it. Jesus tells us, I am the living bread come down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. See, we who stand in this earthly utopia can stay. We can go. Or we could switch. Jesus switched. And we are called to join him. You see, the exceptional earthly kingdom is still earthly. And our story from 2 Samuel brings to mind and concludes a tragic, tragic earthly kingdom. Absalom's story had its beginning weeks ago. King David saw a woman bathing and arranged to take the woman known as Bathsheba, even though she was already married to Uriah, one of David's most trusted officers. She became pregnant, and David conspired to have her husband Uriah killed, murdering to cover adultery. The prophet Nathan went to David and told him a parable about a rich man stealing a lamb from a poorer man. Believing the story to be real, David, in anger and tragic irony, invoked the law from Exodus. The man who steals a sheep must repay fourfold. Notice David understands justice quite clearly when it comes to other people. But David is confronted by the prophecy from Nathan, who says that he was speaking of David. You are the man, and you are no exception. Because David despised God's word and took Bathsheba, Nathan says, the sword will never depart from your house. God will raise up trouble against you from within your own house. God will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor. And so David's fourfold punishment proceeds and concludes today. The child born to David and Bathsheba dies. 1. David's son Amnon violates his own half-sister Tamar. 2. David does nothing in response, but 2 years later, Tamar's brother Absalom kills Amnon in revenge. 3. And finally, Absalom himself rebels against David, taking David's concubines as his own, bringing us to today where we read that David hopes to protect his beloved, if traitorous, son. But the hatchet man who arranged the death of Uriah kills Absalom too. 4. As God warned, as Nathan prophesied, as the Torah commanded, as David judged, 4 lambs are rendered for the one that David took. Remember, weeks ago, we read that David picked up 5 stones on his way to kill the monstrous Goliath. I asked, who are the other 4 stones for? And today we get our answer. David's own lambs. Bathsheba's unnamed child, Tamar, Amnon, and Absalom. We who pick up stones against our enemies find ourselves, those we care about, our people felled by those very stones. Those who believe themselves exempt from the commands of righteousness suffer all the more from its demands. David believes himself exempt from the law and is punished along with his people. This is the earthly city. This is the promised utopia of the anointed King David. Overwhelmingly corrupt and punished. David believes himself exempt from the law and is punished along with his people. Jesus, however, is exempt from the law, but willingly submits to it to free us all. David gets a glimmer of this wisdom when in his despair he claims, "Would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." Do we stay? Do we go? Or do we switch? We who live in this earthly city, are we to stay here? Are we to leave it? Are we to somehow switch places? Those who looked to Jesus as from the line of David were looking for a way out and someone to lead them. And all they found was this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know. How can he say, "I have come down from heaven"? Jesus' reply is that he is the living bread that came down from heaven, and whoever eats of this bread will live forever. For the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. How do we know Jesus comes from elsewhere? Because he's willing to switch places, to take our place, to give of himself. When we give, we may not take like David and his sons. We give, but when we give, even then we're taking. We might give money or time, technology, knowledge, but we rarely give ourselves. We rarely give deeply because it's the self we're serving. There's a deep consumerist strain in the church. We come here for what we get. We come here to receive communion, not so much to participate in it. Even in our ministry, the act of serving is more about us than those we serve. Ask yourself, would you be willing to switch places with the people you minister to? Are you ready to do unto others as you would have them do unto you? It's an important question. Are we ready to switch? If you're not prepared to do that, you must ask yourself some serious questions about your ministry. Are you willing to sit and listen to the songs you sing? Are you willing to receive the sandwiches we prepare? Are you ready to be on the other side of your ministry? Am I willing to sit through sermons? Am I willing to sit through this sermon? If not, then maybe I shouldn't preach it. We should be asking ourselves, do we stay? Do we go? Do we switch? Anti-racism educator Jane Elliott of the famous blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiments told an audience once, I want every white person in this room. Would you be happy to be treated in this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens, she says. If you as a white person would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand up. No one moved. She continued, you didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in our society, stand. No one's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you are so willing to accept or to allow it to happen for others. This is what Jesus does for us. Do you stay? Do you go? Or do you, like Jesus, switch? It's time, perhaps, that we lived into switching, changing places. We live in a world of falsehood, so let's switch. Let all of us speak the truth to our neighbors, for we are members of one another. We live in a world of hatred, so let's switch. Be angry, but do not sin. We live in a world of theft and fraud, so let's switch. Thieves must give up stealing and rather labor honestly and work honestly with their own hands. We live in a world of gossip, of bitterness, resentment, nonsense, misinformation, and deception. So let's switch. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up, as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear. We are called not only to follow this Jesus, but to imitate him. We are called to put down stones and cling to another rock. We are called to forgive, to forego this Davidic kingdom. We are called not to stay in this place, nor are we called to follow Jesus out into the streets. But more than that, we are called to switch, to join with the most vulnerable in our society, the most marginalized, the most powerless. Or at least to ask ourselves what it would be like to be on the other side of our infernal machinery. We are called not only to stay in this place, we are called not only to follow him out to the streets, but to give ourselves, our whole selves, as an offering and sacrifice to God, to forgive as we were once and forever forgiven. So do we stay? Do we go? Or do we switch?